Please welcome Children's Chorus of Washington.
Stand alone, see the rain that's falling down below where I'm reaching. Joining hands slowly takes us to a place we all can believe in. Side by side we could be growing hopes and dreams. If we stand, we will see the ending of the dream growing in our hearts. If we stand, we will see the ending side by side, and hope will find a way to Side by side we could be growing hopes and dreams. If we stand, we will see the ending of the dream growing in our hearts. If we stand, we will see the ending side by side, and hope will find a way to our hearts. We will stand side by side with our dreams. We will sing. We will sing for freedom when we sing with our hearts. We will stand side by side and believe. If we stand together, we will see the ending of the dream growing in our hearts. If we stand together, we will see the ending side by side, and love will find a way to our
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm round of applause for the Children's Chorus of Washington.
Our next song, Ashlo Shah, translates to "The world is sustained by three things: by truth, by justice, and by peace."
of all the feelings that a young person can have, there's one that makes life seem desolate, empty, and sometimes not even worth living. When it is not there, hope. Hope for the future. Hope to be loved. Hope to be heard. When children are without hope, they are robbed of one of the most defining parts of their childhood. We must never underestimate the power of giving hope to a child. Give us hope, and we'll show you the way.
Can you feel the beat of my heart? Listen to the questions I have. Listen to me. It's all very simple to see what we need. Give us hope. My voice is calling. Can you see? Look in my eyes. Can you feel? My hand is reaching. Give us hope and we'll show you the way. Listen to the sound of my voice calling. Can you feel the beat of my heart pounding? Listen to the questions I have. Listen to me. We are the future. Help us believe. Give us hope. My voice is calling. Can you see? Look in my eyes. Can you feel? My hand is reaching. Give us hope and we'll show you the way. Take my hand. Now look in my eyes. Tell me what you see. Give us hope. My voice is calling. Can you see? Look in my eyes. Can you feel? My hand is reaching. Give us hope and we'll show you the way. Give us hope. My voice is calling. Can you see? Look in my eyes. Can you feel? My hand is reaching. Give us hope and we'll show you the way. Show you the way. My voice is calling. Show you the way. My voice is calling. Show you the
Can I have your attention, please? You're going to miss the opening joke if you don't quiet down. I think you just did. Good evening. I'm Mort Halperin, and I'm the chair of the board of J Street, and it It is my great honor to welcome you to this national gala. To begin with, I'd like to thank the wonderful group that we just heard singing, which is known as the Children's Chorus of Washington. Let's give them a round of applause. You may not know that one of the singers in the group is a woman named Shira Ben-Ami, who, as you might guess, is the daughter of our very own Jeremy Ben-Ami. You will hear more about Jeremy in the course of the evening, but I would be remiss if I did not take my time at the podium to express my deep admiration for Jeremy and to say how grateful we all are for Jeremy's leadership in conceiving the idea of J Street, in implementing the idea, and then of carrying us forward through these 10 years. So we'll talk a lot this evening about our challenges, but we also want to remember that this is a celebration of 10 years and a celebration of Jeremy. Tonight caps our 7th national conference with well over 3,000 people attending over the past 3 days. It has been another successful testament to the strength of the pro-Israel, pro-peace movement, and to the continuing appetite in our community for a powerful advocacy voice to represent our values. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, but especially to thank the many members of Congress and the members of the Knesset who are in the audience and who were with us earlier in the conference. As most of you know, on this main podium today, we heard from Senators Ben Cardin, Bernie Sanders, and Brian Schatz. And we will hear later from Senator Dick Durbin, another one of the champions of a two-state solution. Now more than ever, we are grateful for the leadership and the partnership that the members of Congress and the members of Knesset give to J Street. This organization was created for good and bad times, and all of you know that we are in bad times, especially for those American Jews who believe, as we do, that Israel can only exist as a democratic home for the Jewish people if there is a two-state solution. We face growing challenges to that belief, and I think we are going to enter a period in which we are going to find that more and more people desert the notion of two states. We already see the Netanyahu administration paling away the last vestige of pretense that it is for two states, refusing to say that it is for two states, and moving further and further in the direction of actual annexation, most of all of the West Bank. And we see in the United States the Trump administration saying it would only be for two states if both sides were for it, and many members of Congress now as well deserting two states. So we face on the right a growing attempt to say that annexation is okay and that we can live with one state. But I think we're also going to start seeing that from two other critical players here. First, in the Palestinians, who I think are coming to lose hope for a two-state solution and therefore are beginning to advocate, and in my view are likely to increase their advocacy for one state in which, as we were told this afternoon, everyone will have equal political rights in the one state. And in the United States, I think we're going to see a continued growth of the BDS movement and of a more general movement, again, for one state. And I think we will find ourselves in a position where our views are attacked from the right and from the left, and we need to remind ourselves that we really have no choice. There is no alternative to a two-state solution which allows Israel to live as a democratic state. And as unpleasant as it's going to be feeling squeezed from both directions, we need to continue to hold to that position. I think the moment now does not look bright and hopeful, but I think we need to remember how far we have come over these 10 years and to take confidence in the fact that over the next 10 years we will continue to make progress towards a two-state solution. So again, let me welcome you, enjoy the evening, and celebrate.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Finance Committee member Devin Reed-Leonard.
For the past 10 years, J Street has organized trips for members of Congress to travel to Israel and the Palestinian territory and to see for themselves a complex, nuanced, and balanced picture of the realities on the ground. Through these and other trips, the J Street Education Fund has helped better educate our elected officials and community leaders and help them to form partnerships with some of the most inspiring Israeli and Palestinian leaders and activists. I have had the honor of participating in one of these trips, so I can attest firsthand to the lasting impact of visiting and hearing from people on the ground. To that end, I'm excited to announce a major new expansion in this key component of our work. One of the most passionate believers in our educational work was one of J Street's first and most consistent supporters, known to many in this room from the political world and in the Los Angeles community, Len Hill. When I say Len was among our first supporters, I mean that literally. For it was Len who hosted J Street's very first public event at his lovely home in LA on the day we launched this effort 10 years ago yesterday. When Len passed away in 2016, it was a devastating loss for all who knew him and for our movement. Before he passed, Len had engaged in deep discussions with J Street about how he could help to ensure that we continue to fight the good fight, and in particular to bring our values and politics to bear on the thinking of policymakers and elected officials. As someone with a background in film, Len understood the power of seeing in its ability to help change perspectives, teach lessons, and transcend written words on the page. He wanted more people to travel to Israel and the West Bank in order to see the realities for themselves. I am therefore thrilled to announce that in honor of Len's incredible legacy, the Leonard Hill Foundation has awarded J Street a $1 million gift. Which will provide the seed funding to establish the Len Hill Education Program. This program is dedicated to providing American policymakers and opinion leaders with balanced information that lays the groundwork for pursuing Israeli-Palestinian peace through diplomacy. The program will fund trips to the region for hundreds of policymakers and opinion leaders, not only members of Congress, but their staff, community leaders, journalists, and others who shape political, and public opinion. Participants will come away from these trips with a far better understanding of the challenges facing Israeli and Palestinians today, and equipped with the experiences they need to fight for change and for a better future.
The sense of responsibility to engage actively in a democratic society was certainly pressed on me from a very, very early age. And I'm proud to carry on that legacy.
Len was a true Democrat from the very core of the word. He believed in fairness and equity for everyone. I miss everything about Len. I miss his tenderness, his sharp wit. I miss his ability to create a cohesive community, which he uniquely could do. Len made the world a more just place.
Len was a man of action and conviction, and if he saw something that he didn't agree with or something that he thought was wrong, he would do something to make it right.
Len cared deeply about the state of Israel. Historically and presently, the fact that it is a home for Jews was truly important to him.
I looked at Len as a brother. You know, he was really very much cut from some similar cloth. The idea that J Street was going to work within the political system, fighting the fight and getting into the arena and duking it out. I think that's what attracted him, is that he liked a good fight and he wanted to win.
Len saw the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a battle for the soul of the Jewish people. And Len saw J Street as the way to affect positive change.
The Lennial Education Program will support trips to Israel and Palestine for members of Congress, their staff, and other opinion leaders and decision makers. We go to see the Kotel and we go down to Hebron, and you get your feet on the ground and see the facts from the view of the people on both sides of the conflict. You walk in their shoes. That enables you as an American policymaker to play a more productive role in resolving this long-standing conflict.
We hope that by giving this gift to J Street, we are able to accomplish that goal, and hundreds of politicians can learn about the struggles of Israel and the plight of the Palestinians and help be educated on the two-state solution.
When we leave behind a legacy and make a contribution as Len has, what it says is that what I stand for will live on, that the work isn't done. The problems are likely going to be there for a generation, 2 generations, many generations to come.
I believe that part of Len's legacy was to engage the younger generation and to engage our family to be more active in politics, for us to stand up for what we believe in. I think Len would be looking down on us right now and be very happy and would be smiling to know that his legacy lives on in this manner.
And now, please join me in welcoming Len's wife, Dr. Patricia Gordon.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Jeremy. Benjamin and I are so grateful to be here this evening. Len Hill was the man, once met, never forgotten. I am honored to have known him, blessed to be married to him, and I am deeply saddened to be without him. J Street was a commitment for Len. It was his goal to support intelligent understanding of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the importance of building a two-state solution. Len was a man of great intellect and integrity. He believed that knowledge and understanding should be the foundation for equitable solutions. This scholarship represents his desire to promote a courageous and educated dialogue. Len challenges all of us to move forward on this issue with commitment and with passion. I second that.
Thank you, Patty. As we mark J Street's 10th anniversary, it's important to look forward because our work is so far from being done, and the challenges before us are huge. It's also important to look back, to celebrate and to thank the men and women who have done so much for our movement, who remain with us in spirit and will continue to inspire us. In the last year, our movement has lost many important people who helped ensure that J Street could be born and grow to become what it is today. You will see the faces of some of them on the screen in a moment. They are proud to be a part of our extended J Street family, and we are so grateful that they decided to devote energy and passion to building this movement. The very fact that so many of you are gathered here in Washington, speaking out for peace and justice, for diplomacy and for eternal Jewish and human values, shows that this precious legacy that they helped to build lives and breathes in the hearts and souls of each of us. After all, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, the ones who planted the trees, for us to enjoy, knowing that they themselves would never see those trees reach their full maturity. This is the aim of the J Street Legacy of Peace Society, of which my husband and I are proud members, like many of those whose memories we are honoring today. It's a way of ensuring that the work we have all put into J Street will endure even after we no longer are here. It's a way of investing in the future of our community, our movement, and the work still to be done to finally bring peace between Israelis and Palestinians. When we think about the future, we might be excused from regarding what is yet to come with anxiety and trepidation. There's nothing new about that either. Our parents and grandparents witnessed the Holocaust and the birth of Israel. We ourselves may have memories of the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. But now Israel faces a different existential challenge: how to continue to fulfill its promise as a homeland for the Jewish people and remain a democracy that protects the rights and liberties of all people. Helping to secure and guarantee that next chapter in the history of Israel and the Jewish people is the great project that J Street is committed to. We, like Moses, may not personally enter the Promised Land, but if we climb the mountain, gaze into the future, we can all see it before us. And so with deep gratitude and pride, we honor the memories of some of these very special individuals.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President and Mayor of Pro-Choice America, Elise Ho.
In 2007, I was living in San Francisco working for an organization called MoveOn.org when my boss, Eli Pariser, called to say a guy was coming to town who he wanted me to meet. Eli told me his name was Jeremy, and he wanted to start a progressive alternative to AIPAC. I was intrigued and a bit nervous. Now, nervous may sound like a strange adjective for someone who had been as out there in the social change world as I had been. By that time in my career, I had done battle with big banks over environmental standards, marched in countless anti-war protests, and sent emails to literally millions of people opposing most of President Bush's agenda. Nervous was not synonymous with me exploring new social change projects, but this was different. For years, I had tamped down and tried to ignore how my progressive politics were diverging from my relationship I had with my Judaism and with Israel as a Jewish state. I had been raised in a solidly AIPAC family, and while my parents gamely rolled with my evolution as an activist, questioning AIPAC's lock on the Jewish perspective on Israel remained a no-go zone around the family dinner table, and if I was honest, in my own mind. And then on the other side were progressive allies who had a reasonable critique of a hardline approach towards Middle East peace, and what I believed to be a far less reasonable critique and more one-dimensional antipathy towards the country I loved and understood to be a symbol of hope in a world of anti-Semitism. I had no safe space in this festering debate, and so I chose to withdraw until this call. A week later, Jeremy and I meandered easily and aimlessly around the Embarcadero in what started to feel more like a therapy than a strategy session. I nodded as he told me of his concern that Jews were locked into a paradigm that didn't properly express our collective values, and his vision that there be a healthy debate, more voices at the table, and a more robust affirmation for people like us who wanted to hold peace, human rights, and our Jewish identity and affinity for Israel in simultaneous harmony. All of a sudden, I felt the visceral burden of years of holding my progressive politics in one hand and my Israeli politics in another. I knew this thing he was talking about, this idea, must happen. Entrepreneurs say the best ideas are the most simple. They answer a question that has been irritating people for years, and that's certainly true for J Street. It was obvious from the very first conference 1 year later that Jeremy had tapped a vein ready to explode. I came to speak to the J Street U students about the elements of activism and organizing, and there was so much excitement, so much energy, you could feel the air crackling around you. But it wasn't just the students. The multiple generations that filled that first conference, not just to witness or to learn, but to participate, demonstrated that this was an idea whose time had come. Not without pushback, mind you. Personally, for me, from family members who saw my name all the way across the country on the speaking roster, and professionally for Jeremy, who had to repeat relentlessly his unimpeachable credentials to be able to even start to voice his vision. Still, it's too simple to suggest that Jeremy just filled a slot and anyone could have done the same. And in fact, one of my favorite stories to chide Jeremy about is his early insistence that he was just setting this thing up and then he was going to hand it off to someone else. I smiled and nodded and indulged my new friend, even though it was 100% apparent, even at that time, that this was Jeremy's calling, that J Street needed Jeremy to become all it could be. These jobs are hard. Long days, time away from family, tiny steps forward with what feel like giant steps backwards. Upsetting the status quo is rarely something people line up to thank you for. The infrequent affirmations that come from a newly organized group of people can be steamrolled immediately by entrenched interests aligned to undercut you. Every opportunity, every crisis can take on a magnified quality, making the person in the hot seat feel completely irreplaceable all the time. But Jeremy has balanced the demands of work with being present for his family and friends in a way completely unique to this town. Jeremy returned phone calls, lent ears, dispensed advice with his typical humor and incisiveness. Jeremy's movement leadership is defined by his combination of enormous strategic acumen and his profound sense of humanity. This has never been a game to Jeremy. Sure, he's in it to win it, but winning is more than a single vote count, greater than the sum of any one election cycle, and tops having the last word with a political foe. Jeremy reminds us that what draws us together transcends a political fight. It's a soulful quest. That peace, that justice, that Jewishness is messy and beautiful and requires a perfect combination of moral direction and strategic flexibility. The past 10 years would have been the furthest thing from easy, even if we lived in normal times, and we don't live in normal times. But through it all, the enduring leadership of Jeremy and J Street has built something so special. Look around this room 10 years later. Allow yourself to feel it. We're not simply a political force, although we are that. We're not simply an advocacy organization, although we are undeniably one of the most powerful. J Street is a home, a peace of mind, and a peace of heart for so many like me that were searching silently before we even knew we were searching for harmony in our values and in our lives. Jeremy, tonight we honor you for building this home.
The origin of J Street is in the aftermath of the 2004 presidential election and the firestorm that erupted around the presidential candidate I was working for, Howard Dean.
Jeremy was one of the really critical public policy people in the campaign who, of course, was diverted after I said that our relationships should be even-handed between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which I still believe.
There was a firestorm of opposition from within both the mainstream of the Jewish community and also political circles in Washington, D.C., and there was nobody to stand up and support Governor Dean.
But afterwards, I think Jeremy felt inspired by the notion that you had to stand up for what you believed in, that politics is not enough if you don't have a spine.
The premise of J Street is to make the case that the majority of Jewish Americans understand that to be pro-Israel is to play a balanced role that is necessary in order to help resolve this conflict.
J Street is responding to a political problem, not a policy problem. I think what was important with the arrival of J Street was to make sure that those friends that we had in the Congress understood our perspective on American foreign policy.
J Street provides people a voice and an opportunity to know and understand the country and to know what our role as the United States is vis-a-vis Israel. I think what J Street provided for members here in Congress and for our communities is a different political home. It's one that's open to a range of views. And I always believe that the bigger the tent, the better we are.
J Street's ability to influence policy and rhetoric on Capitol Hill has come about because of the organizational ability of a lot of good people who are committed to Israel, but at the same time committed to a peace that they feel is durable. J Street played a very important role in helping many senators and congressmen to understand the importance of the Iran deal. And I'll never forget the full-page advertisement in the New York Times that appeared after the agreement, because J Street put it there. Today, as we're celebrating 10 years of J Street, Iran cannot make a nuclear bomb. J Street understands that for Israel to be strong and protected long into the future, Israel must make peace.
I first found J Street U at our student involvement fair. I saw their little booth that said pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-peace, and my mind was just blown. Growing up, I didn't feel like I knew enough about Israel, knew enough about the conflict to really say anything, and everything just felt not only polarized, but inaccessible. J Street U has influenced my college experience more than I anticipated. I had no idea how much I was going to just fall head over heels into this organization. I'm ready to step into the world and really make a change the way that I want to see my politics manifested in the world because of J Street U.
People are hungry for what J Street has offered the American Jewish community. There has been this mistaken sense that to be pro-Israel means that you love and support Israel and therefore would never criticize Israeli policy under any circumstances. J Street gave an entire population of American Jews permission to stay in the Israel conversation, to bring our heart, our soul, our intellect, our core commitments, and I think that has had a tremendous impact.
I'm with J Street because I believe in and want a better future for Israel.
I am with J Street because ethics and activism.
I'm with J Street because I believe in a two-state solution.
I'm with J Street because it's effective.
I'm with J Street because of my Jewish values.
Foreign policy vision centered around diplomacy,
integrity, and courage.
Jewish and American values.
J Street is, I think, a wonderful organization dedicated to the important proposition that being pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian are not mutually exclusive.
My message is how proud we should be in what J Street has achieved over this last decade, how proud we are of the important role that J Street plays, and how proud we should be of J Street's future, because J Street's most important work is really ahead of us, not behind us.
Please join me in welcoming my friend and our leader, Jeremy Ben-Ami.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What an incredible evening, what an incredible few days, what an incredible 10 years. About 10 and a half years ago, I told my wife, Eliza, I'm thinking about quitting my job and giving this crazy idea of starting a new organization a try. I said to her, I can't tell you it's going to work. I don't really have a plan B, and I'll probably be pretty unemployable. What do you think? And since that moment, and for the last decade, in fact, for the overwhelming majority of our marriage and for my kids' lives, this endeavor has been at the center of my life and by extension, their lives. Truth be told, it's probably had a greater impact on their lives than mine. The stress, the anxiety, the personal pressure, they're always felt a lot more by the family. So if there's anyone here tonight who deserves gratitude and recognition, it's my wife, Eliza, and my wonderful children, Shira and Ari. I also want to take this opportunity to thank from the bottom of my heart the incredible people who have made this organization possible. They're the members of our board, like Mort Halperin, Carol Winograd, Victor Kovner, I know you're up here somewhere. Some of the folks who couldn't be with us tonight, like Davide Guillot, who was there from the very beginning, Alex Stanton. There are people like Daniel Levy, Matt Dorff, Jim Gerstein. They were all part of the brainstorming from day one a dozen years ago. They're the staff, the incredible staff of this organization. You know, it's hard to believe that we put together our first alumni listserv of the staff in advance of this conference. It has over 100 people. Combined with the 70 who work for us, that's nearly 200 people who've been part of making this organization possible. I particularly want to thank Rachel Lerner, Jessica Rosenblum, that's right, Steve Krubener, Dan Kalick, Dylan Williams, Adi Tellem, Kate Press, and Rachel Eisner. They have all worked here as long as I have, basically. And there's really no way to adequately thank all of the chapter leaders and the advocacy coordinators, the members of our rabbinic cabinet, the incredible J Street U activists. But this 10th anniversary, it's a moment for all of you, for all of us, to step back and appreciate what we have built and all that we have achieved over the past decade. For those of you who know me well, undoubtedly know that this moment of appreciation of what's been done is going to be brief. Because this is a moment of dire crisis for the United States, for Israel, and for the Jewish people. It's a moment on when we need to focus on what still needs to be done. It's a moment that cries out for action. In the United States, we see what I believe is the gravest threat in my lifetime to the greatest system of government the world has ever known in the form of Donald Trump and the horrific impact he has had on the politics of this nation. And similarly, in Israel, we face a threat to the 2,000-year dream of reestablishing a state that serves as the national homeland of the Jewish people. It's a dream that motivated my great-grandparents to travel from the Pale of Jewish settlement in Russia in the 1880s to settle and build a home in the land of their ancestors. It's a dream that motivated my grandparents 100 years ago to buy a piece of a sand dune north of Jaffa in order to build a modern city that today is Tel Aviv. It's the dream. Let's hear it for Tel Aviv. It's the dream for which my father and my father-in-law, who is here with us today, fought in 1948 and for which their friends and their families gave their lives. It's a dream, and it is a reality today, that is threatened by the policies of the government of Israel led by Bibi Netanyahu and the settlement movement that dominates it. The path the settlers and Netanyahu are charting is one of endless occupation, limitless settlement expansion, and creeping annexation of the West Bank. It's a path that is blind to the cost, to the long-term security, democratic nature, and Jewish character of the State of Israel that comes with seeking to control all of the land. So, in this moment of crisis, both Israel and the United States need courageous and principled political leadership that can meet these challenges head-on. The political headwinds are strong. Our opponents are fierce and they are ruthless, and they mount swift and noisy attacks. The modern media environment has all but eliminated thoughtful discussion of issues and brought in its place a gladiatorial arena of childish tweets, name-calling, and whataboutism. But the threats and the challenges we face are far too important for us to throw up our hands and walk away in despair. Even though what brought us together in J Street is a specific and narrow concern about the future of the State of Israel, we understand well that the challenges we face are far greater. We run the real risk in the coming months of another war in the Middle East. Last decade, as those of us who were starting J Street sat together, one of our primary motivations was our regret that the Jewish community's institutional leadership failed to stand up against the war in Iraq. The 70% majority of Jewish Americans opposed to the war didn't have an organized and adequate voice in the political debate. Instead, our community was perceived by too many to be among the most hawkish influencing American foreign policy. And now, with this president assembling a war cabinet, surrounding himself with the likes of John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, and getting ready to jettison the Iran nuclear deal, we face another moment of truth. And this time, our community must not be silent. We must call loudly and clearly on Congress, stop a reckless and uninformed president from starting yet again down the path to war. The confrontation with Iran that the hawks in this country, in Israel, and in the Gulf seek will have horrific consequences, not just for the state of Israel, but for the entire Middle East and the world. And the threats posed by the present political leadership go well beyond the loss of the two-state solution and the shredding of the nuclear deal with Iran, well beyond the mandate of J Street. Climate change, non-proliferation, water and resource management globally, gun control, immigration, racial and social justice. Liberal democracy itself is at risk as the United States under Donald Trump abandons the vital role that it has played in the world, on the world stage, for the last 70-plus years. But what ties all these issues together, issue after issue after issue, is the need for political leadership that is willing to take risks, to challenge political orthodoxy, and to stand up, as Howard Dean said, for what is right. In this room tonight are dozens of members of Congress and the U.S. Senate, and a fair number of the candidates who are looking to join them. J Street exists. J Street exists to provide those of you strong enough and courageous enough to lead us in a different direction with the support that you need. The essence of J Street, the essence of what we honor here tonight, is that for the sake of our children, for the sake of our grandchildren, for the sake of the planet and all the people who live on it, we must stand up to the loud and powerful voices on the extremes and fight for what we know is right. Some of my friends like to call me an unrepentant optimist, because I do believe that we can change the course of history against forces that seem out of our control. But as I've said to many J Street groups over the years, when I'm asked if a glass is half full or half empty, I do not accept the question. I just want to know where the pitcher is so we can fill the glass up. I buy the notion that President Obama sold me, that we are the change we've been waiting for. It is on us to build the future that we want. I believe with all my heart that the success J Street has enjoyed in our first decade is only a precursor of the success that lies ahead in our second. Thank you for supporting our efforts to shape the future through J Street. I promise all of you that in our second decade, as in our first, we will meet this moment of challenge with the leadership and the urgency needed to bend the arc of history toward a more just and better future. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome J Street Past Board Member Bill Singer.
Good evening. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker tonight. Dick Durbin is the senior senator from the great state of Illinois. The Democratic whip of the United States Senate, and with J Street's help, the majority whip of the United States Senate. and he is a forceful and eloquent advocate for human rights, human dignity, both in the U.S. and throughout the world. Senator Durbin is also a personal friend for almost 50 years. We both worked for another great Illinois senator, Paul Douglas. Both of us have children named in honor of Senator Douglas, who profoundly influenced our lives. My wife, Joanne, and I cherish the times we are with the Senator, Dick Durbin, and his wife, Loretta. In the 10 years since our founding, we at J Street have known Senator Durbin as a strong friend and ally. He has been a proud and outspoken advocate of a sane, rational, diplomacy-first foreign policy. That stands in absolute contrast to the policies being advanced by the current administration. Senator Durbin supports policies that advance our nation's security by promoting the values of peace, freedom, democracy, and tolerance. He is the top-ranking Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee and that Subcommittee on Defense, which allocates nearly half of our nation's discretionary budget. He was an absolutely essential champion of President Obama's diplomacy with Iran. In late summer 2015, when many predicted that the nuclear agreement with Iran would be gutted by a Senate resolution of disapproval, Senator Durbin, with our help, orchestrated a David versus Goliath battle to preserve the accord. An article in the Washington Post was titled, quote, "How Senator Durbin Spent His Summer Saving the Iran Deal," close quote. He continues to stand in the way of reckless efforts by the Trump administration and congressional hawks to undermine and tear up this successful pact. In 2002, Senator Durbin was one of only 23 senators who voted against the invasion of Iraq. When he talks about the dangers of an unnecessary march to war and touts the importance of diplomacy, he knows what he is talking about. We know we can count on him to be a steadfast and passionate voice against the likes of John Bolton and Mike Pompeo as they try to push our country down that path once again. As a rock-solid supporter of the State of Israel, Senator Durbin understands that the only way to secure its future as a democracy and as a homeland for the Jewish people is through a two-state agreement with the Palestinians. He demonstrated his commitment to that essential goal last year when he added his voice to a letter from 10 senators to Prime Minister Netanyahu, opposing demolitions and settlement expansion in the West Bank. The senators wrote to the Israeli leaders, quote, "We urge you to change course so that you do not foreclose the possibility of establishing two states for two peoples," close quote. Friends, let's now give a J Street welcome to our guest, my senator and friend, Dick Durbin.
How are you? Angus, good to see you. Hello. Good to see you. Thank you very much. Let me thank Bill Singer and also acknowledge George Mitchell is going to be a critical part of your program this evening. I see my colleague Angus King, and the lights are keeping me from reaching out. There's former Senator Mitchell. Good to see you, George. You're going to be a great part of this program this evening. Elise Hogue, Mart Halperin, many friends who are gathered here. 10 years ago, as Jeremy has just recently recounted, He had a vision for what it meant to be a true friend of Israel, a vision that echoed the words of former Secretary of State John Kerry when he spoke about the United Nations resolution condemning Israeli settlements. Here's what John said. Some seem to believe that the U.S. must accept any policy, regardless of our own interest, our own positions, our own words, our own principles, even after urging again and again that the policy must change. Friends need to tell each other the hard truths, and friendships require mutual respect. As we mark the 70th anniversary of Israel's War of Independence, it's necessary that we continue to tell the hard and sometimes uncomfortable truth to our friends. I want to tell Jeremy and all of you who made J Street a reality. You've been such an important part of the dialogue here in Washington. You have changed the conversation. You have moved us forward in a new dialogue as a nation in support of Israel, but a nation that is dedicated to a vision of a two-state solution. 2 years ago, I came to J Street to thank you for supporting President Obama when he called for an historic understanding with Iran. It was an incredible achievement, not just for the President and the United States, but for Israel, for the world, and you were part of it. Here's what this deal did. It put in place the most intrusive monitoring regime on any nation's nuclear program since the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It reduced Iran's ability to produce a nuclear weapon by reducing its centrifuge and uranium stockpile, and it extended the breakout time to produce a nuclear bomb. I didn't know that I was going to be personally engaged in the whipping of this, although I do that for a living in the Senate. But as it turned out, there was some uncertainty in the beginning as to which Democratic senator would take the lead. And Harry Reid gave me a nod in my direction and said, proceed, do your best. And I did. I reached out to my colleagues on the Democratic side to try to measure where they were and what was going through their minds. And there were a couple things we did which were a little different. One of the first things I realized was that August is a deadly month. It's deadly because the members of the Senate and House disperse around the world. Some of the greatest ideas in politics die in August. People sitting on beaches, sipping drinks, forget all about this place and don't want to be bothered. And so I decided to become the pest that every whip must be, and to figure out where every Democratic senator was at every day of the month of August. And periodically to call and ask them, how are things with the family? Been thinking about the nuclear agreement with Iran? Can you make it back for a briefing? The CIA would like to talk to you. Number of agencies. And so we kept people at least in conversation. As I was doing this, members were speaking among themselves, groups of them, interested in this issue. They came back from the August break, and if you'll remember, the dominant theme at that point was not this Iran nuclear agreement. Those who opposed it didn't say we're against the agreement. They just said, oh, we could do better than this. And so I decided to try something I'd not seen before, and I invited to meet the Senate Democratic Caucus the ambassadors from the P5+1 nations. They sat at a table, the ambassadors of China, Russia, sitting next to one another, ambassadors from Great Britain, France, European Union, Germany, they were all there. And our caucus asked them questions in a very informal way. And the first question, of course, was, will the next agreement be better? Which led to laughter from these ambassadors. They reminded our caucus, do you know how long we've worked on this? Do you know what it took to reach this moment? If you naively believe that tomorrow there'll be a better agreement, you're wrong. And then I can recall the ambassador from one of the countries I won't name said, do I understand that you are going to turn on your own president and vote against him? Really? Members of the Senate Democratic Caucus thought about those answers, and they brought in the experts and asked hard questions as well. And the net result of it was 42 members of the 46 members of the Senate Democratic Caucus supporting the Iran nuclear agreement. It was an historic moment. I don't think I imagined at the outset that it would turn out the way it did, but it did. And you played a big role in that. You may not realize it, but I hope you do, because you were the other voice in the room. You were people speaking up for Israel and for the agreement. You were those who believed, those who are gathered here this evening and others, who believed that what we are seeking to achieve with the Iran nuclear agreement was clearly not only in the best interest of the Middle East and the world, but in the best interest of Israel too, that they would have a safe neighborhood to live in. Well, that was then and this is now. A new president, a new situation. We have a president who surrounds himself with chaos, who on any given day could say or do almost anything. He doesn't appear to be driven by philosophy or any moral compass. Sadly, one of the few constants in his erratic tweets and rants is his insistence that the United States should pull out of this landmark nuclear agreement with Iran. And this reckless move seems more driven by an obsession of undoing anything achieved by President Obama than by any sound policy. Can anyone imagine that it is an effective negotiating strategy with nuclear North Korea to arbitrarily walk away from the Iran nuclear agreement? As we face a May 12th deadline, as we face the May 12th deadline for extending U.S. sanction waivers on Iran, we face a man-made, president-made crisis created entirely by the White House. There is no telling what Tehran would do if the U.S. tears up the deal. But Iranian officials have warned they will resume production of 20% enriched uranium, which could trigger a confrontation in one of the most volatile regions of the world. And we will have lost that unique global coalition that came together to create this agreement. Rather than trying to undermine and kill this deal, we should build on it, use years of compliance to advance follow-on measures, and work with nations around the world to make certain we do everything we can to bring peace to the Middle East. More than anything, J Street has been focused on the peace process in Israel. Nothing is more central to peace than solving the Israeli-Palestinian question. Rhetoric, of course, matters, and this president's rhetoric and policies are making peace harder to achieve. He's made no serious effort to bridge the two sides. Instead, he focuses on petty and sometimes provocative measures that do nothing to advance the larger peace process. Defunding the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, which provides funding for Palestinian refugees, or moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem in the absence of a larger peace agreement are not strategies for peace. We used to know because it was the accepted foreign policy of the United States what a peace agreement would eventually look like. A negotiated two-state solution requiring mutual recognition of Israel as the homeland for the Jewish people and Palestine as the homeland for the Palestinian people. One that definitely assured Israel's security. Yet, for the first time since the Oslo Accords, a recent poll shows Israeli and Palestinian support for a two-state solution to be below 50%. And it gets worse. 77% of Palestinians now oppose the position that the future state of Palestine will be a demilitarized nation protected by a multinational force. 77% of Israelis now oppose East Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital. Among younger Palestinians, polling suggests their preferred option is a one-state solution with equality and no longer just as a fallback position. The good news is that there's still a plurality, some 46% of Israelis and Palestinians, who prefer the two-state solution. Dr. Deborah Shushan put it best when she paraphrased a Winston Churchill tweet, She said, that would have been something. Can you imagine that? I can't. Here's what she said in a tweet. Israelis and Palestinians are two states may be the worst solution, except for all the others. I still believe, in order for a fair and lasting peace, the two-state solution is the right place to be. The alternative is the status quo, which is in no one's best interest, and because of changing demographics, threatens to undermine Israel's democracy over the long term. So in order to restart negotiations, with the United States playing the role as mediator and honest peace broker, here's what this administration needs to do. Come out strongly in favor of a two-state solution. Reiterate and clarify what the President said in his Jerusalem announcement. We are not taking a position on any final status issue, including the specific boundaries of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem or the resolution of contested borders. We need political will on both sides, to Israel and Palestine, and the United States is uniquely situated, maybe the only nation in the world situated to make this happen. If this administration truly wants to preserve a path toward a two-state solution, it has to speak out against the consistently expanding settlements in the West Bank that threaten the viability of any future Palestinian state. But it should be even-handed and speak out as well about the Palestinian government's failure to reform, hold elections, and address Hamas' stranglehold on Gaza. And it should work with the extraordinary leaders in Jordan and other countries in the Middle East. Jordan, you know, is an incredible story. When I think of the debate in the United States of America over bringing in 50,000 refugees, 50,000, as we face the worst refugee crisis in the history of the world, I cannot help but think about Jordan today and the refugees that they have accepted, a diverse grouping of refugees from all over the Middle East, an extraordinary show of courage and leadership on their part. Let me close by saying this. It's been 55 years to the day that Martin Luther King wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail, 55 years ago. And he said that famous line in his letter, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Now, for the time being, the Trump administration has forfeited the United States authority as a neutral broker and given up on a two-state solution, which may be the only way to bring real peace. In the hearts and minds of the Palestinian people, we have abandoned our standing and influence in this peace process. The result, Israel is less secure. It is the ultimate betrayal to Israel and peace. Today, justice everywhere is truly threatened. It is hard and the outlook may be bleak, but we cannot and will not give up on the possibility of peace or those marching to secure peace. In his final speech, Yitzhak Rabin, who died fighting for peace, said, "For Israel, there is no path that is without pain, but the path of peace is preferable to the path of war." Rabin was right then, and he is right again today. Thank you for allowing me to speak. And let me just close by saying, my friends in J Street, if I can just, one word in closing. You're such a critically important voice in this political process. I hope you appreciate that when members of the Senate and House sit down to make some of the toughest decisions, they remember things that you've said. They remember your friendship. They remember your encouragement. What you have achieved in 10 years is truly extraordinary. A commitment to the future of Israel and a commitment to peace in the Middle East. Thank you all so much for allowing me to speak this evening. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your dinner.
Ladies and gentlemen, our program will resume shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will resume immediately.
Wow, 10 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, for a special video address, please welcome Opposition Leader of the Zionist Union, Member of Knesset, Isaac Herzog.
Wow, 10 years. J Street, it's awesome, it's incredible. And that shows that your voice is important and that it must be heard and that it should be part of the pluralistic nature of discourse in the Jewish community, in the American public, and of course in Israel. As the leader of the Israeli opposition, the one who led Labour in the last election, I want to commend you for your steadfast position calling and demanding to move forward towards a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. But let me say that as we celebrate 70 years to the independence of the State of Israel, the only nation-state of the Jewish people, one needs to understand a few points which are essential. Israel has a just cause. Moreover than that, Zionism has a just cause. And moreover than that, Israel has a story to tell which is unheralded in the history of nations. The conflict is an issue that must be resolved. Peace should be resolved, but that does not justify undermining the State of Israel in any way or recognizing or accepting boycotts and divestments and sanctions against the State of Israel, our only homeland, the only homeland of the Jewish people, which is a great frontier for Western civilization and values of democracy in the region which is so torn by bloodshed and strife. Yes, I believe peace with the Palestinians and with our neighbors is possible. Yes, I believe that as part of the strategic challenges of the region where Iran spreads hate, yes, spreads hate, when a leader on our northern border butchers 700,000 people from his own citizens, including by gas, we should understand where we live in. And yet, the great values which were laid down by our founding fathers, from Theodor Herzl down to David Ben-Gurion and Yitzhak Rabin, were values of equality, values of social justice, values of extending our hand to peace while protecting and defending and preserving the security and well-being of the people of Israel. So let us work together, Israelis and Jews from all over the Jewish diaspora around the world. Let us work together, Israelis and leaders abroad, to try and yet again reignite the peace process in order to preserve and to protect the nation state of the Jewish people, the nation state which was recognized by the UN resolution in 1947. We must work together to separate from the Palestinians and lead to an independent Palestinian state side by side with Israel, living in peace under security guidelines that preserve and protect the well-being of the people of Israel. I wish you well in your conference, in your deliberations, and let's hopefully meet soon at the 20th. Wow, 10 years. J Street, it's awesome.
Well, thank you. First of all, congratulations to Jeremy and to all of you for getting to the end of dinner and the conference. Everybody loves to come and talk on the stage after dinner, right, Senator Mitchell?
That's right.
That's a specialty of our politicians. So I think we're all in good hands with Senator Mitchell tonight. I figure we might as well jump right out of the ballpark while you're eating your dessert and start with the T word. It hasn't gotten that much attention this evening, but yes, I'm talking about Donald Trump. Just the other day, of course, when he announced his strikes in Syria, he had a comment that I wanted to read to you about the prospects for peace in the Middle East. It was not a super optimistic comment. He said, no amount of American blood or treasure can produce lasting peace and security in the Middle East. It's a troubled place. It's a very troubled place. So is America out of the peacemaking business, or is this just a temporary detour, sir?
I don't think we can or will be or should be out of the peacemaking business. But before I go further, I want to join in congratulating Jeremy, all associated with J Street, on your 10th anniversary. Secondly, I want to note that by my count, I am the 8th speaker this evening. So I feel like Zsa Zsa Gabor's 8th husband on their wedding night. I know what to do, but I'll be damned if I know how to make it interesting. But on the theory that although everything's been said, not everyone has said it, and so I'll be glad to give you my thoughts on the question you've asked.
You're done.
The United States is the dominant world power, will be as far into the future as humans can see. Indeed, I think, contrary to much current commentary, notwithstanding the nationalistic views of the current administration, I believe that the next several decades will see an expansion of American influence, an increased spread of culture, other forms of internationalism by our country, because it is in our national interest. The international regime established in the aftermath of the Second World War, led by the United States, created a period of relative prosperity, relative democracy, far greater than had existed in the world prior to that time. A long way to go to universal success in any area. And although the world is a very dangerous place, the fact is that by the most important metric, human lives, the world is now much safer than it was in past centuries. In the 20th century, in a world in which the total population was a third to a half of what it is now, 100 million people died in conflict. There are too many deaths now, but they're in the dozens, the hundreds, and the thousands. We have to do our best to advance democracy and our interests. The President takes the view that treaties and alliances and agreements with other countries harm the United States because we don't, quote, we don't get anything out of them. The fact is, treaties, alliances have been extraordinarily beneficial to the United States because we do get enormous benefit from them. We derive tremendous help from helping others. And let me get to the Middle East. We have a vital national interest in a stable Middle East in many respects. First, we have an unshakable commitment to Israel's security, the right to exist behind defensible borders. We can best serve that interest by having a presence in the region. Secondly, although we all know that the world must, in the coming decades, transform to a carbon-free economy, under the most optimistic of scenarios, that will take decades, maybe longer, and in that time, a continued steady flow of petroleum and natural gas from the Middle East remains vital to a fully functioning world economy. Less to us because we've had a huge increase in our own production. And thirdly and finally, we do well where democracy does well. I reject the notion that it is somehow wrong or arrogant for us to encourage and promote others to pursue the same democratic values that we want. And the proof of the pudding is one of the great problems in the world today is the large movement of people across national borders. fleeing their countries, looking for freedom and opportunity in other places. And I'm constantly reminded by questions from sometimes hostile audiences who say we're in decline and China's rising, that when is the last time you heard of anyone trying to risk their lives trying to break into China? Well, it happened. 4 years ago, 2 guys escaped from a North Korean concentration camp, and they swam the river into China. Yet one of our greatest problems, one of the greatest problems in Europe, is the flood of people coming, and they don't risk their lives to come here because we have the best cruise missiles. They come here because what they see is freedom and opportunity. The same thing that led the grandparents and great-grandparents and everybody else here in the room. And that's our great strength.
I can see, and I'm glad to know that you're still an optimist, Senator.
I am.
I think to be a politician is an optimistic thing. To be a peacemaker is an even more optimistic profession. So glad to see that you're in the right profession. But let's talk a little bit about where this two-state solution lives today. It's an object of catechism in this group.
Yes.
It is something that you very much believe in.
I do.
But we've been talking really for the last decade about whether the two-state solution is dead or merely on life support. So I'd like to know, first of all, where your view of it is right now. Is it in temporary suspension and life support because of the Trump administration, or do those poll numbers that Senator Durbin was telling us about suggest that this is a long-term trend away from this as being politically possible anymore?
It is a long-term trend, and it's a disturbing trend. About a year and a half ago, I published a book precisely to make the argument that the only realistic solution is the two-state solution. And Israel secure behind defensible borders, with people free of the fear and anxiety that so much dominates their lives, and a Palestinian state, independent, sovereign, non-militarized, that does not pose a military threat to Israel. Now, it is a fair subject for criticism because it's been around for a long time and it has been achieved. But what I and my co-author did in the book was to carefully analyze the alternatives. And when you analyze them, neither of them, and it's basically a one-state solution or a sort of status quo extended, and neither of them can produce a desired result. Both of them will inevitably, if adopted, end in a huge and violent outbreak, and the only possible answer is a two-state solution as the type I've described. And so I wrote the book to try to stem the tide that Dick Durbin mentioned and to try to reverse public opinion. It is noteworthy in his comments that a plurality still supports a two-state solution in Israel, somewhat less so among the Palestinians, but I think once you get into a serious negotiation with a prospect for success. In Northern Ireland, where over a span of 5 years I chaired 3 separate sets of negotiations, very difficult. We had 700 days of failure and 1 day of success.
And you just celebrated the 20th anniversary of that
just last week.
Yeah.
That's just last week. 4 days before we got the agreement, a public opinion poll appeared on the front pages of every newspaper in Northern Ireland. And it showed that 83% of the people believed no agreement was possible. 7% believed it was possible, 10% had no opinion. They had been let down so often, they were super cautious and somewhat negative in their attitudes. And I believe that's the case with respect to a two-state solution. If you had a serious negotiation with the United States deeply involved, and there were some prospect for success, I believe those numbers would reverse themselves.
Well, that's a really interesting point. The events in recent months would suggest, though, that you're moving in the opposite direction. Do you think that the unilateral recognition of Jerusalem as the capital by the Trump administration has made it less possible to have the kind of real negotiation you're talking about?
For decades, the policy of the United States has been in favor of a two-state solution to be achieved by direct negotiation between the parties themselves with American support. And in pursuit of that policy, we have adopted certain principles. The first is that issues will not be decided outside of the negotiations, the so-called final status issues, and that neither party nor the United States will predetermine those issues until the negotiation begins. President Trump has said he wants a negotiation, and he keeps saying he's going to get the best deal ever out of that negotiation. Now, with respect to moving the capital, Jerusalem was, is, will be forever the capital of Israel. There is no doubt about that. Nobody questions that. The only question is, will there be in East Jerusalem a Palestinian capital of a Palestinian state? So, the President's defenders are rhetorically correct in saying all he's done is recognize an existing fact. But in fact, what he's done with what I believe to be an unwise and premature decision has made getting negotiations started and getting an agreement in negotiation far more difficult than it was in the absence of that. And the significance of it is the two groups that have been the most outspoken in favor of the decision are the very right wing in Israel, including many in the government who are publicly opposed to there ever being a Palestinian state on the West Bank, and Hamas, because both of them don't want this to end with a two-state solution. And so I think that for many Israelis, of course, they see it as a welcome thing because it recognizes what they know to be the true capital of Israel. But it makes achieving the ultimate goal far more difficult and therefore was, in my judgment, unwise.
So you and I, though, were talking a little bit beforehand, and you actually have some surprising views about why there are actually some positive developments in the region when it comes to the possibilities for peace.
I do a lot of speaking and a lot of interviews, and I'm often asked, well, what do you think about Jared Kushner being over there and being negotiator? My answer is I hope and pray he succeeds. And the fact is that probably more important than the identity of the American representative are the circumstances in the region. There are many moving in a very negative way. We can see, of course, the tremendous upheaval and convulsion occurring within Islam. The divide between Sunni and Shia, which existed for 1,400 years, was not a religious difference. It was a political difference, a fight over power between two groups on the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Over 1,400 years, it's had periods of remission and then intense conflict. It's now very intense, spreading. But there are other countervailing factors. I believe that the Arab leaders, the leaders of the Muslim world, are increasingly coming to recognize and to accept that Israel's there to stay. The statement by the Crown Prince, soon to be King of Saudi Arabia, recently was significant, something that their leaders would say in private, but never before in public.
Well, do you think Donald Trump should get credit for that? He thinks he should get credit for that.
Well, you tell me anything that he doesn't think he should get credit for.
But seriously, you were President Obama's envoy to the region. I'm sure you've looked back on this. For whatever complicated reasons, there was a feeling in Israel, you look at the numbers, this is one of the only countries in the world, along with Russia, by the way, where Barack Obama is less popular than Donald Trump, that it's gone in the opposite direction. Why do you think that is, and did that hurt the prospects for peace?
Well, I think, respectfully, in your question, you stated a few facts, but didn't state all of them. The fact is that there are only two countries in the world in which Trump has a favorable rating.
Yes.
And that's Israel and Russia. President Obama had a favorable rating in the vast majority of countries in the world, so I think that's
absolutely. That's
the
my
full
question.
context.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the full context. Well, the reason is obvious. I mean, he's doing what the current government wants and what their people think there is helpful. I mean, I don't think there's any difference reason about that. I suspect that his ratings are plummeting in Russia right now, but we don't know that. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be in Israel, but I think it's pretty clear.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about the broader picture in the region and a new openness of some kind for the Sunni Arabs to possibly recognize Israel. How do you think that would actually affect the ability to make peace with the Palestinian Authority, with Abu Mazen? Do they really have the ability, does someone like Mohammed bin Salman have the ability to influence the process inside?
Yes. Think about this fact. The highest priority foreign policy of the government of Israel is to resist the drive hegemony by Iran for control primarily of the petroleum resources of the Persian Gulf, but political control throughout the region. There's nothing new about that. You go back 2,500 years to Greek history, and it's a struggle between the Greek city-states and the Persian Empire for control of the Eastern Mediterranean. Every country seeks to exert influence in its own region, and we should not be surprised that Iran, being one of the largest countries in the region, seeks to do that. We have to resist them. Now, the same foreign policy objective that Israel has is also the highest foreign policy objective of Saudi Arabia and most of the Gulf Arab states. In a, quote, normal political circumstance, two countries who have the identical objective in the same region would cooperate actively to attain that objective. That doesn't exist now. There are some private talks underway. They get along much better. They don't have the public exchange of negative comments, but there isn't the overt cooperation that you would accept, because, in part, the Palestinian issue. It isn't like the Arabs really care about the Palestinians, but it is an overwhelming political issue for them. And keep in mind, it isn't just the Palestinians, it's Jerusalem. The Palestinians have independent authority to make a deal with the Israelis on all subjects on their own except for Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a Muslim issue, and it requires the approval of the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Moroccans, and many people in the Muslim world. So there is a basis for some common security arrangements as they both try to resist the drive for hegemony originating in Iran. The Arab states, as part of the Sunni Shia and the ancient hostility between Persians and Arabs and Israelis because of the direct threat to their existence. And on that, next to the last point, most Americans underestimate the ancient hostility between Persians and Arabs. When Saddam Hussein went to the gallows and the noose was placed around his neck, the last words he spoke were, "Damn the Persians." It's a tremendous hostility there, augmented, intensified by religious differences, but independent of them as well.
Well, so let's talk about the Iran deal. Senator Durbin talked a little bit about this, but we're facing this deadline very soon, in May 12th.
Yes.
It's a self-imposed deadline in many ways. All indications are that the president's new national security team agrees with him that the Iran deal was not a good deal and that he should do what he can to abrogate it. Is there, as you put your negotiator hat on, is there any way for the Europeans to figure out a way to work with political figures here in Washington and actually convince Trump to save it? What would you do if you were in the middle of this negotiation?
Well, first, the context. The United States led the world into the nuclear age, and for the past 7 decades has led a worldwide effort to restrain the dissemination of nuclear weapons with considerable success. There are dozens and dozens of countries in the world today who possess the capability to produce nuclear weapons, but who refrain from doing so in reliance upon the United States and the nuclear non-proliferation regime created under the leadership of the United States. It's a remarkably successful story. A brief digression. Of the many disturbing statements that were made by President Trump during the campaign, the one that disturbed me the most, frankly, and that to the best of my knowledge has never been modified or reversed, is when he said it might be a good thing if Saudi Arabia, Japan, and South Korea got nuclear weapons. I cannot imagine a policy more destructive to the national security interests of the United States or instability around the world. Now,
he hasn't repeated it as president.
He what?
He hasn't repeated it.
But he hasn't reversed it
That's
either.
Right. He hasn't
Well,
disavowed
thank God for small things. Now, with respect to this agreement, first, it was not an agreement just between the United States and Iran. It was the United States, Russia, China, Germany, Britain, and France versus Iran. It was the sanctions which drove Iran to the table. The reason the sanctions were effective is because they were universal. We have a long history of sanctions in our country. One time when I was majority leader, someone toted it up for me, and we had half the world under sanctions. Most of the time they don't work because they're unilateral. Although U.S. sanctions unilateral still have some effect, they do not have the coercive effect of universal sanctions. So, as other speakers have noted, those who opposed the nuclear treaty said, oh, well, just reimpose the sanctions and they'll come crawling back. Well, as Senator Durbin pointed out, we couldn't reimpose the sanctions because the other 5 countries publicly stated they would not reimpose the sanctions if the agreement were rejected. So we would then go from universal sanctions, which were effective, to unilateral sanctions, which would not be effective. So the idea that you could have got a better deal is, frankly, doesn't hold any water. Now, is it perfect? Of course not. It's a compromise. Does it last for all time? No, one of its weaknesses. But it is indisputable that Iran has changed its course and its policies and is in compliance with the agreement. And as it seeks to extend its domination of the region, it is far less effective without a nuclear weapon than it would be had they achieved a nuclear weapon. There's only 2 ways to keep a country from getting a nuclear weapon: by negotiation and agreement or by war. And if, in fact, that agreement is abrogated, we're going to be confronted with that decision. And will we then, having withdrawn from the agreement, we will then place ourselves in a position of great difficulty in organizing the international coalition necessary to prevent it through armed conflict.
So, talking about deals, you've had a lot of time to think back at your own moment as a would-be Middle East peacemaker. As you think about where we are now, talking about the potential of war, with an actual war in Syria, with the 2 parties not only not talking to each other, but not looking like they're going to be talking to each other anytime soon, do you think there was any chance to have done things differently in the Obama administration? Was there a moment that you look back on and you say, you know, if we'd only spent another hour in that meeting, if we, you know, what were the hinge points that you think about late at night when you're thinking back to your turn
well, of
in
course,
the hot seat?
I think if I'd had a little more authority, we might have gone further. But the I was in the room in September of 2010 along with Secretary Clinton, with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas. I'd spent dozens, maybe hundreds of hours with each of them separately, and I came to the following conclusion. Their societies are divided on the question. We heard the statistics earlier and we've discussed them. So any political leader about to enter into momentous negotiations affecting the life and future of their society, knowing that the slightest compromise will arouse the hostility of half of his society, knowing also that in order to get an agreement, there has to be compromise, has to have some sense of confidence that it will be worth it, that we can do it and get an agreement. And in the case of these two leaders, it's completely lacking. Now, this is what I'm about to say is speculation on my part, but it's based on many hours of personal discussion, much study of the subject. I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu thinks that Abbas does not have the personal or the political strength to enter into the kind of agreement needed, and most importantly, to implement it. And therefore, he's got to ask himself, why am I going to go through this when I know it won't work because of him? Abbas, I believe, reaches the same conclusion for a different reason. He doesn't trust Netanyahu. He doesn't believe a word he says. And he doubts Netanyahu's commitment to the two-state solution and did cite to me personally. He was against it, he was for it, he was against it, he was for it, and now he's for it, sort of. And so he believes that they can't ever reach an agreement because Netanyahu doesn't really want one. He wants only to placate the United States, and therefore why should he endure not just the political heat, but the tremendous personal threat to his own life and safety that would come with reaching an agreement. And therefore, they both seek to create the impression that they want negotiations when, in fact, they're staying away from them. Now, it will take maybe new leaders, maybe a change in heart, maybe a change in circumstance, but I believe it will happen. Because I believe that societies, like individuals, ultimately act on self-interest. And it takes a while sometimes to figure out your self-interest. The voters in Kentucky and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin are now finding out how their self-interest is being served. And so I think that the people of Israel and the people of the Palestinian people, and at some point some leaders are going to figure out this is in the best interest. Now let me describe to you one of many conversations I had with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I tried to make the case for the two-state solution. He made the sensible argument. Look, the states are collapsing around us. And this was in the early stages of the so-called Arab Spring, much worse now. He said, if we create a state, it could collapse. And we'll have Hamas right on our doorstep. And that's a serious thing. You can stand on the West Bank with a shoulder-fire rocket and hit Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. My answer was, it is far more likely that the Palestinian Authority will collapse in the absence of an agreement than as a consequence of an agreement. And you can see that happening today as the standing of Abbas and the Palestinian Authority is declining among his people, and the single most important reason is they think he's an enforcer of the Israeli occupation because of the intense security cooperation that still goes on to this day. When you recall when Corporal Shalit was kidnapped, that Hamas made a raid on Israeli territory, killed 2 Israeli soldiers and captured 1. And it became a huge symbol of national concern within Israel. And so for years, the Israeli government negotiated with Hamas through Egyptian and German mediators, and they finally negotiated Palestinian prisoners for Corporal Shalit. I begged the Prime Minister, give some prisoners to Abbas. Give some prisoners to them. There's about 12,000 Palestinians at all time in Israeli prisons that rotate in and out, so they have a stock there. And I said to him, give Abbas some prisoners, because if you don't, the message to not just the Palestinians, but to the whole Arab and Muslim world, the only thing that works is violence. Hamas comes in, commits an act of violence, kidnaps a soldier, and you give 1,000 people from Abbas, for whatever his faults and weaknesses, and they are many, has for 25 years stood up and said, we are opposed to violence, we accept Israel's right to exist, we honor prior agreements, and he has pursued a very aggressive internal policy of suppression of Hamas. When I was over there, one of the constant complaints I got were from these NGOs and international good cause groups who complained about the harsh treatment that the Palestinian Authority was handing out to Hamas. Arrests, detention without charge. Of course, they cycled them in and out too. You know, they let them in, arrested them in the front door, they let them out the back door. And so that can't go on forever.
Well, Senator, your point, I think, is really well taken, that it's not so much the terms of the deal that were the issue when you faced it. It was the politics and the politicians who would make it. And if you didn't have the politicians who had the strength to make the deal, they weren't going to make the deal.
Isn't that true of every negotiation?
Well, that's exactly right. So what I was going to say is we're getting the red light. We know you've been a very wonderful and patient audience. Senator, my guess is the group would like to recruit you as an American mediator and call you back into our divided society.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell and Susan, for such an insightful conversation, and what a great evening to cap off our national conference. As co-chairs of the National Development Committee, Peter and I want to thank each and every one of you for your unparalleled support over the last 10 years.
We are thrilled to announce that we have raised more money for this 10th anniversary conference and gala than ever before. You'll be happy to know that we broke even our aspirational goal of $500,000, which we're very happy for. We want to thank especially the amazing J Street staff, our fellow board members, our fellow co-chairs of the gala, and thank everyone and all of you generous supporters, many of whom are here tonight. Thank you.
Every person in this room has invested in what's made J Street great for the last 10 years. We look forward to the next 10. We thank you very much for coming, and good night.